Did we just get our first glimpse of Sauron? Is there going to be a hidden Sauron in this series? Or is the real Sauron the friends that we made along the way? We have theories. The Numenoreans have finally entered the chat, and wouldn't you know it, the star-shaped island is full of both jerks and drama. Welcome back to ScreenCrush, I'm Randolf, and this is all the Easter eggs, references, and little things that you might have missed in episode 3 of Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. Do you stay in the past, or do you press forward? This is the general theme of this episode, and it finds its way into the stories of Galadriel, Halbrand, Arondir, the Harfoots, and Elendil. If pushing forward means leaving your friends behind, do you do it anyways? So it turns out that Arondir was captured by orcs at the end of episode 2. They take him to a covered outpost where all of the vanished men and women from the Southland villages are being kept. The orcs have been using tunnels and coverings to avoid the sun, the light of which is very dangerous for them. They are creatures of darkness and they cannot abide the light. This is why Sauron will eventually cover the entire land of Mordor in shadow, and why he sends shadows to blunt the light of the sun when sending his orc armies into battle.
The orcs of Mordor have no love of daylight, so he covers the face of the sun to ease their passage along the road to war.
Hey, you know about that? You know at Mordor how it's never sunny? How do the plants grow? Because that's like the food chain and stuff.
Because it's magic.
Okay then.
Now none of these imprisoned folk are here for the orcs. They are all here for someone that the orc calls Adar. We'll hear that name again before the episode's end. Arondir is put to work immediately, reunited his friend Thondir and his former watchwarden Revion. Apparently none of the elves that were charged to watch the Southlands escaped. They're all in chains and they're all forced to excavate. This makes sense as this area is close to Mordor, if not Mordor itself. The flyover map has shown the distinct image of Lake Nuren, which Tolkien describes as being located in the south of Mordor. Frodo and Sam do not even get close to it in the book Return of the King, but Tolkien does make reference to the slave-worked fields away south in this wide realm. Sauron plundered those fields to supply his armies, and we can see the beginnings of that right here. We'll get a far more obvious connection to Mordor later in the episode.
Mordor, where shadows lie.
Galadriel wakes up on the ship that rescued her and Halbrand in episode 2. It is indeed a ship of Numenor captained by Elendil, a major figure in Tolkien's work.
Victory was near.
Sauron will not have forgotten the sword of Elendil.
He refers to Galadriel as one of the Eldar, a name given to all elves who answered the initial summons to Valinor in their earliest days. Remember, the elves were created in Middle-earth, and then the Valar, that's the gods of this world, called them westward to the land of Valinor. Not every elf accepted, but Galadriel's people did. She is of the Noldor, and all of them answered the call. We see that Elendil has taken Galadriel's dagger, so there may not be as much trust here as we thought there would be. They sail into Numenor at long last, an island kingdom located between Middle-earth and Valinor. This is the main bastion of the world of men in this era. The Edain were among the men who fought alongside the elves against Morgoth, and their losses were so great in the War of the Wrath that the elves gifted them this land.
They paid for this isle with the blood of their kin.
The island was raised from the sea, and then the Edain were led to it by the Star of Arundel.
I give you the light of Erendir, our most beloved star.
So Numenoreans were sometimes called the Dunedain in this period and were blessed with long life. Their descendants were also referred to as Dunedain when they came to Middle-earth, with both Elendil and Isildur being among them. You remember those two guys from the opening of Lord of the Rings.
That Isildur, son of the king, took up his father's sword.
So Aragorn is their direct descendant and is likely the most famous of all the Dunedain.
You cannot be 80.
87.
You are one of the Dunedain.
The descendants of Numenor founded the kingdom of Gondor, so naturally the design of Numenor itself borrows heavily from the architecture and design that we see in the Lord of the Rings movies, Minas Tirith especially. The large statues that dominate the central city evoke Argonath, the great monument of Gondor that we see in Fellowship.
Long have I desired to look upon the kings of old. My kin.
Elendil himself is one of the figures in the movies, alongside his son Isildur. In Tolkien's writing, the Argonath features both Isildur and his brother Anarion. So incidentally, the Valar really only put one rule on the people of Numenor. They told them that they are not allowed to sail westward out of sight of the island. The Valar did not want them to come to the Undying Lands.
Seems reasonable.
Well, you'd think, wouldn't you? Halbrand is amazed by this place, and Galadriel reminds him that these men are not like him. They fought against Morgoth and not with him. Remember, Morgoth was the original evil that existed and Sauron was his servant. So Halbrand, unlike his ancestors, didn't personally fight alongside Morgoth, but elves have long memories. Galadriel also notices the island has changed much since it was settled, and the sneers that she gets from everyone are part of that change.
Numenor began to turn away our ships.
Elves used to come and go freely from this island and were friends with the Numenoreans, but that is no longer the case. So aside from the architecture, the helmets of the Numenoreans also evoke the helmets of the soldiers of Gondor. The first words we hear from Queen Regent Miriel are,
No one kneels in Numenor.
which is a not so subtle clue that these people are done being thankful to the Valar. Resentment is festering.
What have the Romans ever done for us?
Galadriel tells them who she is, and they gasp because she is not just any elf.
Galadriel of the Noldor, daughter of the Golden House of Finarfin, commander of the northern armies of High King Gil-galad.
She references her father Finarfin, who is a half-brother to Feanor. Halbrand introduces himself as just Halbrand.
This is Jon Snow.
All Galadriel wants is passage back to Middle-earth, but no one wants to give her that. Chancellor Pharazôn is introduced in this scene, and he is a major player in Tolkien's writing about Numenor. If you have a weird feeling about this Chancellor, then you should trust it.
The Republic will be reorganized.
Queen Miriel is the daughter of the king, Tar Palantir, in Tolkien's writing, and we think that we have a good idea of why she's ruling the court and her father is not, but more on that in a bit. Galadriel and Miriel go at it, with Galadriel reminding her that it is because of the elves that they even have this island in the first place. Miriel sees it differently. They earned this island, paying for it with many lives. Now this may be a natural resentment, but it's a resentment that Sauron is going to exploit and further divide the men and elves. So Halbrand doesn't want to go just yet. We saw him giving an interested eye to the Numenorean forges. So he pipes up, and eventually Pharazôn says that these two will be the guests of Numenor for the time being. Halbrand also showcases a gift for thievery when he swipes Galadriel's knife back from Elendil. Now though Miriel thinks that Galadriel is but one elf, Pharazôn counsels that an avalanche can start with one stone, which makes us recall the Two Towers and Gandalf's words in Fanghorn Forest.
The coming of Merry and Pippin will be like the falling of small stones that starts an avalanche in the mountains.
He ties this into Miriel's father, and we'll know why shortly. He's also wary of Elendil, noting that Elendil's son Isildur is trying to get into service at sea, just like his father. And that is when we meet the young Isildur doing his best at crewing a ship. Eventually, he'll do this. As well as this.
Destroy it!
And he ends up like this. For now, though, he's just a kid trying to learn the ways of the sea, but when looking at Numenor in the distance, a creepy voice calls his name to him. It is similar to how the ring calls to Aragorn in Fellowship. When his captain says,
There is no harsher master than the sea!
We can't help but think of what the ultimate fate of Numenor will be. I mean, we're not going to spoil it, but the sea is very much involved. Now, it is mentioning here that a Valar named Ulmo was the master of the seas, and one of the most powerful of his kind. We can't help but think of this mighty being every time the power of the sea is mentioned. One of the most powerful of all the Valar, Ulmo himself did not participate in the eventual fate of Numenor. That task was undertaken by a being who was even more powerful, but no spoilers.
For now.
Right. The repeated refrain of the sea is always right makes sense because they came to their island from the sea, and some of them, Elendil and Isildur included, will eventually return to it. Elendil in particular is a skilled mariner. Apologies for mentioning this again, but the sea will prove that it's always right as the series progresses.
Spoilers.
I mean, this writing's been out for a really long time, but yes, spoilers. Isildur has his head in the clouds, so what is he thinking of? Power, riches, women, or all three? What desires truly drives this character who will one day prove pivotal in the story of the One Ring? His sister, Eärien, is an invention of the show and not present in Tolkien's writing. Because of this, she's something of a question herself. We also get a good look at Nemoth the Fair, also known as the White Tree of Numenor. It is related to Telperion, one of the two trees of Valinor. Remember, those trees were destroyed by Morgoth, but the Valar Yavanna used a surviving seedling of Telperion to grow Goliatheon, which in turn resulted in Celeborn, the tree, not the elf. The seedlings of Celeborn were brought to Numenor early in its history by the elves, and Nimloth was the result. Unlike Telperion of old, these trees are unable to give off light. Now, if Nemoth looks familiar, it's because Isildur brings a seedling of it with him when Gondor is founded, and that seedling grows into the White Tree of Gondor.
Yes, the White Tree of Gondor.
Now, whether Nimloth is flourishing or not is often a sign of Numenor's health, just as the White Tree is a sign of Gondor's health. It is being tended to in this period of Numenorean history, but how long is that going to last?
Yeah, how long's that gonna last?
Miriel tells us as much.
The faithful believe that when the petals of the white tree fall, 'tis no idle thing.
Her using the phrase "the faithful" is loaded with lore, as divisions within Numenor will eventually separate the people into two groups. There is the faithful on one side, and on the other side, people who are generally awful. Elendil and Isildur are of the faithful. That's why you see them in the Third Age. As for the non-faithful, Miriel seems like she can go either way, because when she talks about the Valar, she says,
Let their eyes and their judgment are ever upon us.
She really hits the word judgment, which showcases the resentments against the Valar that are already present. Well, geez, Valar, I know you created the world and you invented this awesome island for us, but what have you done for us lately? Dumb Valar. She grills Elendil on the meaning of his name, and it doesn't just mean one who loves the stars. In the ancient tongue of the Eldar, it can also mean elf friend. Now we know from Tolkien that he lives up to this name, but here Muriel is concerned that he's a friend of the elves who are actually no longer welcome on this island. Ultimately, Elendil is a man of the sea. The sea put Galadriel in his path. I mean, possibly with the help of the Valar Olmo, it kind of depends on your imagination. And for him,
and the sea is always right.
Muriel has him watch over Galadriel, and he's given a sword that has a hollow pommel just like the Narsil. That's the sword that Elendil famously will wield later on in life. So is this sword supposed to actually be a differently designed Narsil, or is it just another sword? Time will tell. Always does. Back in the miserable Southlands, we get a reminder of how the orcs cannot abide the sunlight. More importantly, Arondir takes notice of this. Revion marks that the orcs have continued to reference Adar, which is an elvish word. They wonder if Morgoth did indeed have a successor. He did. And why the successor would use an elvish name. They note that Sauron once had many names, but Tolkien never wrote that Adar was one of them. Anatar was the most famous, which was the name that he used when he assumed his fair and beautiful form. Remember the key line from the prologue of Lord of the Rings.
But they were all of them deceived.
This series is showing how Sauron deceived all the realms of men, elves, and dwarves. So unlike others in this episode, it's not an everyone escapes or no one escapes situation for Revion. If one of them gets out, then that elf can alert others and bring help. The orcs are upset because the elves have stopped working thanks to the roots of an old tree. And their answer?
Rip the whole stinking tree down!
Saruman will eventually find a similar solution to his problems.
Burn it.
And we saw how that worked out for him.
What you say?
Revion defends the tree, and one of the orcs pretends to offer him and the other elves some water. It turns out to not be poisonous, but the water was never the danger. The danger is from the orc slicing Thondir's throat while they're all drinking up, symbolizing how you can be completely on guard against one danger while leaving yourself open to another one. Thondir's death made us think of Haldir's death in Helm's Deep. To prevent more elven deaths, Arondir cuts down the tree. It's for the greater good.
How can this be for the greater good? The greater good. Shut it!
Elendil reveals to Galadriel that he speaks Elvish and that there are still signs of the old friendship in many places throughout the city. He grew up in the west, close to the Hall of Laws, and the most faithful people to the elves still reside there. In Tolkien's writing about Numenor, the western area was called Eldilande, which translates to mean Haven of the Eldar. Galadriel and Elendil ride to the west, and Galadriel seems completely free of all the burdens while she's on horseback. Her white horse evokes Shadowfax, as well as Asfaloth, written by Glorfindel in the books and by Arwen in Fellowship. Back to Halbrand's storyline, he's trying to get with the blacksmiths that he gave the hungry eye to upon his arrival. He isn't allowed to join them until he gets a special crest, so he gets them all drunk and swipes one, proving adept at thievery once again. He gets caught and attacked, first asking the smiths,
"Please, don't do this."
Why? Well, because he proceeds to kick the stuffing out of all of them with like minimal effort. And as he's told everyone, he's trying to turn over a new leaf.
Maybe he's John Wick.
He's not John Wick.
You don't know. He could be John Wick.
Fine, he could be John Wick. His line, "Call me Halbrand," is a reference to the first line of Moby Dick, which is,
"Call me Ishmael."
Really?
No. Galadriel discovers the Hall of Laws was assembled by Elros, who was the first of the Numenorean kings. Elros was the brother of Elrond, and their parents were Arendil and Elwig. Both Elros and Elrond were considered half-elven due to their heritage, and following the War of the Wrath, both of them were given a choice: live as mortal men or live among the elves. Elrond, as we know, chose the elven way of life, but Elros made the opposite choice, becoming one of the Edain and following the Star of Arendil to Numenor. The line of the Numenorean kings is also called the Line of Elros. So Galadriel actually knew Elros, but she tells Elendil that she was always closer with his brother, Elrond. We've already seen that friendship in this series. Elendil lets it slip that the king who ruled before Muriel was loyal to the elves and was deposed because of it. He keeps himself in a tower, and once again, we're fairly sure that he's talking about Tar Palantir, the father of Queen Regent Muriel. The secret of the sigil that Galadriel's been following is then revealed, and it's awesome. While it may also represent the Eye of Sauron, it is no sigil. It is a map, specifically one of the Southlands. When put to a map of Middle-earth and turned to the side, the map symbol looks exactly like Mordor. A plan written in black speech has also been found, one that intends for evil to endure and thrive. It is
to be enacted in the event of Morgoth's defeat by his successor.
Galadriel's worst fears are confirmed. Sauron is still at work, going along with a contingency plan that has been in place for a very long time. The Southland storyline and its relation to Mordor suddenly snaps into focus. After this grim realization, the series does an about-face and brings us back to the Harfoots, who are enjoying a festival prior to their upcoming migration. Sadok Burrows and the others have a chant.
Nobody goes up tree.
And nobody walks alone.
But they don't really mean that as literally as we may think. Largo Brandyfoot is still recovering from his injury in episode 2. As some have pointed out, he broke his ankle at the same time the stranger broke a stick. Now, does this mean that the stranger is actually Sauron? That theory is very hot right now, but we don't think so. Largo tells Marigold that they will not be left behind because of his injury. They will all make it to their next destination. Unlike the captive elves in the south, the Brandyfoots are going all or nothing. Nori is still trying to decipher the stars shown to her by the stranger, but Poppy Proudfellow is against it. She's gone full Bilbo Baggins at the start of The Hobbit, giving Gandalf a good morning and not wanting anything to do with anything.
Good morning.
Her line,
"There's common sense and nonsense,"
also reminds us of a pre-adventure Bilbo. She's also upset that the stranger murdered some of the Fireflies, but we don't think this points to him being Sauron, or being evil at all. Nori steals a star chart from Sadok while he's busy rewriting a verse, making us think of how Bilbo rewrote one of his own poems in Rivendell in the Book of the Fellowship.
There and back again. A Hobbit's Tale by Bilbo Baggins.
Sadok begins a gathering.
Most agreeable, honorable Harfoots.
Which reminded us of Bilbo's speech at his 11th birthday party.
My dear Bagginses and Buffins.
And then he reads a list of Harfoots who fell behind on previous migrations. They either died or couldn't continue on anymore. Those that are left behind are, as Sadok says, carried on in their hearts and memories. So, like, no one walks alone is more of a spiritual ideal for them. Why is Poppy so reluctant to stick his neck out to help someone else? Well, the entire Proudfellow family are either dead or have been left behind.
What was your name again, dear?
Miss Thorndyke.
Thank you.
We wait for you, they say. For a nomadic people to survive, they're bound to have to make difficult choices. His own wife Daffodil was taken by wolves, and surely he'd rather have that not happen to him.
We wait for you.
And I wait for you. The stranger tries to make sense of the star map that Nori stole, and he ends up lighting it on fire. He bungles the attempt to put it out so badly that he ends up revealing himself to the entire camp. So then Nori's secret's out and no one is happy, but she was not content to just leave the stranger there. She didn't want to leave him behind when she doesn't have to. She's going to do the right thing and not the traditional thing. When she's told that they don't need friends, they only need to survive, she responds with a heck of a line that basically sums up Lord of the Rings.
Without friends, what are we surviving for?
Now we are reminded of the Fellowship, of Thorin's company, and of the multitudes of friendships that have saved Middle-earth time and time again. Although Nori has broken Harfoot laws and should be de-caravanned, Sadok lets her and her family stay on, albeit at the back of the caravan. Nori knows she isn't special and she's just a little person after all.
But you're only quite a little fellow. In a wide world, after all.
But she believes that the stranger is important. Now, we don't think that a bright, pure, imaginative soul like Nori would be drawn in by a man who is secretly Sauron. He may have caused Largo's accident and the death of the Firefly, but it doesn't seem like he did either out of malevolence. If anything, they were both done out of ignorance. He's not used to the magic surging within him, and he doesn't yet know how to use it. If he's a wizard, then he's not yet a proficient wizard. The please help me look in his eyes, coupled with the perpetually innocent look on his face, does not look dark to me. I mean, sure, the series making this character turn out to be Sauron would be a heck of a curve, but look in the stranger's eyes. Come on. Above all else, he makes us think of something that Frodo once said about Aragorn.
I think a servant of the enemy would look fairer, feel fouler.
Now, he still could turn out to be Saruman, one of the Blue Wizards, Radagast, or purely the spirit of Olorin, or an entirely new character, but the Harfoot connection and the intensity of his eyes are screaming Gandalf to us. It's the most obvious theory, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. And he proves that he can be useful too, as he helps to carry the Brandyfoot cart when Largo cannot. Now, we know that Gandalf also enjoys a good cart. He says friend with utter sincerity. So if this guy's evil, then consider us well and truly fooled. At a family dinner with Elendil, Isildur, and Eärien, Isildur brings up his brother Anarion, who we have yet to meet on this series. Now, as we previously mentioned, the Argonauts feature sculptures of both him and Isildur in Tolkien's writing. Peter Jackson's movies did not give Anarion that much attention. Elendil makes us think that Anarion has ventured out to the western shores, where we know that people are still sympathetic to the elves. And this is where Isildur's interests lie, even though Elendil maintains that the past is dead. Isildur, knowing exactly who Galadriel is and having an interest in elvish works, makes it clear that the past is not dead for him, and he may have interest in more magical and more powerful things. And this line from Elendil,
"We either move forward or we die with it,"
really makes him sound like a Harfoot.
They likewise will be carried with us in our hearts and in our memories.
Halbrand was locked up after his spree of violence, so Galadriel goes to visit him.
Who is he?
Well, Galadriel is wondering the same thing. She found a scroll in the west that has the same sigil on it that we saw in Halbrand's little pouch. She says that a man bearing that mark once united the Southlands. She knows Halbrand is from the Southlands and remembers that he said that they have no king, so she puts it all together.
Your people have no king, for you are him.
Halbrand all but confirms it, telling Galadriel that the historical king she spoke of swore allegiance to Morgoth. She refutes that it was mere destiny that brought them together. Galadriel believes in much higher powers. She wants this king in rags to return to Middle-earth with her so both of them can redeem their bloodlines. She says that her lineage began the war. Morgoth obviously was the chief adversary, but the Noldor, and especially her uncle Feanor, certainly made things worse. So once again, we have a secret king situation similar to Aragorn in some ways.
This is no mere ranger. He is Aragorn, son of Arathorn.
Like Halbrand, Aragorn was wary of his connection to weaknesses that came before him.
The same blood flows in my veins. Same weakness.
Halbrand is no king of Gondor because Gondor doesn't even exist yet. Now, Halbrand is Sauron is a popular theory, partially because he is earning the trust of the elves, he's smitten with smithing, and he already has a connection to those who followed Morgoth. So why stop there? Largo Brandyfoot could be Sauron too. Not every character on the show has to be Sauron in secret.
It's still possible.
It is, but look, we're not so sure. In Fellowship, Aragorn speaks of who the Ringwraiths once were.
They were once men. Then Sauron the Deceiver gave to them 9 rings of power, one by one falling into darkness.
Now, we never get much information about who these 9 powerful men were, but we're going to take a shot in the dark and guess that Halbrand could be one of them. We know that Galadriel is going to accept one of the elven rings, and in the beginning, she'd seen nothing wrong with the 9 men accepting rings as well. If Halbrand is something of a king to the Southlands, then one way for Sauron to get rid of the threat would be to give him one of the 9 rings, which would eventually turn Halbrand to Sauron's side. And if you really want to get crazy,
you want to get nuts? Let's get nuts.
You could say that Halbrand isn't just a king that accepts one of the 9 rings and is corrupted by Sauron. You could say that he becomes the most powerful of the 9, the Lord of the Nazgul and Sauron's chief lieutenant. He's not just a secret king, he's the secret Witch King.
What?
The Witch King of Angmar memorably appears in Tolkien's saga.
This is my power.
But little is known of where he actually came from. Tolkien didn't write much about it. We know he founded the realm of Angmar in the north after he succumbed to Sauron, and he remained a formidable force from that moment on. Now, though it is mostly the invention by Peter Jackson, Galadriel speaks of the Witch King with dread in the first Hobbit movie.
In a tomb so dark, it would never come to light.
The thought of her having a personal experience with him before he turned gives this moment new meaning. Now, maybe he's not the Witch King, but if Halbrand is a king of men and will possibly proceed to be a decent king of men, then we can see him being duped by one of the 9 rings. Either that, or he's just King Halbrand, a famous Tolkien character who Tolkien never wrote much about, like ever. In a tower that looks very similar to the citadel of Minas Tirith, Miriel tells her father, who, I'll say, would be Tar Palantir according to Tolkien's lore. We think that he's the same character here because Miriel tells him that it is happening.
But we feared. The elf has arrived.
So why do we keep harping on this? Tolkien wrote that Tar Palantir had the gift of foresight, and in one of his visions he foresaw the White Tree perishing and the end of the line of kings. The series may have his visions seen it begin with the arrival of an elf, which would explain Miriel's over-the-top hostility toward Galadriel. The fall of Numenor has been seen by her father, and Galadriel could be the first stone that will cause the avalanche. Now, the name Tar Palantir might sound familiar, and that's because it is similar to the name given to the Seeing Stones, the Palantir. They were called Seeing Stones, and they were cause for trouble in Lord of the Rings.
The lost Seeing Stones. We do not know who else may be watching.
Feanor created an unknown number of them, and some of them wound up in Numenor, and Elendil brought 7 of them to Middle-earth. Now, while they weren't used for seeing the future, they could be used to watch and communicate over vast distances, and they will be making an appearance very soon on this series. Back in the Southland /Mordor / the place where bad stuff is going on, Arondir and his fellow captives launch an escape attempt. They try to use the orcs' aversion to the sun against them, and like Legolas, they make fancy use of their chains. We get our first real look at a warg in this series, and we think that the Watch Warden is going to escape. Instead, he ends up getting riddled with arrows like Boromir. Arondir is finally taken to Adar as the orcs chant the name of their leader. We see someone who looks like an elf before the episode cuts to credits.
What is this new devilry?
Well, first and foremost, I don't think this is Sauron. Adar means father in Sindarian, and the elvish appearance of this character leads us to think that this is a fallen elf who has become a father to the orcs. He would definitely be an invention for the show, as Tolkien never wrote about a fallen elf named Adar. What Tolkien did write about at one point is how the orcs were originally perversions of elves, something that the movies had Saruman bring up.
Do you know how the orcs first came into being? They were elves once.
They were going to have to breed orcs to establish Mordor, so a character like this would be useful to Sauron. How did this particular elf fall from grace and wind up as the father of the orcs? I mean, we may find out. But our strongest theory on the true identity of Sauron could be found in this mural in Numenor. This person right here is obviously your mom. Well guys, that's all the Easter eggs we found, but if you found any, let me know in the comments below, or you could @ me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.